What if we could see cyber threats in real life? They would be everywhere, always watching, looking to gain access to our networks, clouds, and applications. Yesterday's technology can no longer stop them, but they can be stopped with consistent cybersecurity that protects work everywhere. Zero Trust with Zero Exceptions by Palo Alto Networks. We've got next.
Hi, my name is Ian Lim, and I'm the Field Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks. Today, my topic is Zero Trust for the Metaverse. And the agenda is fairly simple. I'm going to start out by talking about the realities of the Metaverse today, followed by how there are already security implications to the way that we implement the Metaverse. And then, follow through with really how do you apply a zero trust principle and a zero trust strategy across the 7 layers of the Metaverse. Let's go and get started. From a reality perspective, we are dealing with a concept, right, that is visionary, and it's adopted by a lot of major companies. But ultimately, this is a journey that we're taking, and today, in its current state, there is no one metaverse, right? There are lots of metaverses out there, and as a matter of fact, there are almost different factions of metaverses. So the gaming industry has their own, the enterprise has theirs, retail will have theirs, and so on and so forth, social, for example. And all these various metaverses are going to start over the course of time consolidating, and that consolidation really means that there's interplay, that identities from one metaverse is going to be able to traverse another one, and most likely through things that we already know, such as APIs, such as single signed-on capabilities and the likes. But the reality is that there are multiple metaverses, and there will be efforts to stitch these metaverses together, or to make the identity and the digital assets fluid across these metaverses. So that's one. Which leads me to the second point. Organizations are trying to figure out what to do about the metaverse. Everyone has a plan. Well, I wouldn't say everyone, but a lot of major companies have plans to look at the metaverse. Retail in particular, they're starting to build out 3D spaces to kind of adopt a metaverse idea, right? The manufacturing area is really trying a different method of digital twinning, or really having a physical component that has a digital counterpart and mirroring that in the metaverse. Social enterprise avatars, meetings, etc. So you'll see evolution. I think the key point here is that the reality is that the metaverse is a fast-moving innovation, right? And there's going to be lots of trials and errors, which leads me to my last point. Because it's so innovative, because it's a fast-moving environment, there's going to be a lot of new and unknown attack vectors, right? Attack surfaces, and this will be apparent as a company starts investing in them and making it very appealing for attackers to target. So all that to say is that Metaverse is a journey, and the attackers are very cognizant of this journey and will exploit them. Today, as it stands, the Metaverse is insecure I'll highlight 3 major ways. The first one is cloud vulnerabilities. And the idea here is that most Metaverse platforms will be built on cloud-native architectures. And cloud-native architecture, as well as the API component that's inherent in it, has vulnerabilities. Here on the slide, I show you an example of a very simple cloud-native architecture that we stood up internally at Palo Alto Networks, and we use infrastructure as code. We use Helm charts to deploy Kubernetes apps, and then we use container images instantiation, right? And as you can see, every time we move through that development lifecycle, we are introducing misconfigurations, and largely a lot of these misconfigurations comes from using public code that's available in public repositories. Now, you say, oh, I'm not going to do that, but the reality is that this cloud native culture has a lot of very, very good reusable components. Case in point, Log4j, that is a piece of code that a lot of vendors used, and when there were vulnerabilities in Log4j, it impacted a lot of people. SolarWinds is another key example. A lot of people don't know that SolarWinds was actually a compromise on the CI/CD pipeline, whereby the attackers injected malicious code into a DLL file that was part of the new version. And so when SolarWinds servers were downloading that particular version, they downloaded malware. So the CI/CD pipeline in any metaverse platform is absolutely vulnerable to attacks, right? We use our tool Checkoff to scan public repositories. Terraform modules, we saw 45% contain at least one critical or high severity insecure configuration. Kubernetes, 99%, one or more insecure configurations. Container images, again, 96% of them have known vulnerabilities. So anytime that you're doing cloud development and you're using third-party code, you have and stand the risk of basically creating vulnerabilities within your metaverse. Next, I want to talk about the IoT component. The IoT is essentially the interface into the metaverse. So to interact with the metaverse, you've got to have a headset. You're either using a smart device, you've got augmented reality. In the case of digital twins, you're implementing some sort of a smart device. But when we look at these endpoints, right, these IoT, these smart devices, the researchers from Rutgers have discovered that they were able to actually compromise a headset. So in their particular case, they were able to say that if you trick a user to downloading a malware onto the headset, that headset's able to read biometric information or information that basically if you're reading out a credit card transaction in a metaverse, it's able to pick that up. And further along, when you deep dive into kind of the whole gamut of IoT, we've seen the doubling essentially of attacks, right? 3 billion attacks of IoT devices in 2021. And we think that this is trending upwards because the metaverse, spatial web, Web 3.0 are all literally blurring the lines between the physical and the digital. And a lot of those components have the overlay at the edge of IoT devices, and those IoT devices are susceptible to attacks. Last but not least, right, I wanted to highlight as well that the metaverse is going to play in the field of crypto. It's going to play in the field of NFTs, right? And we've seen that both crypto and NFT are extremely targeted as well. Recently, we've seen that crypto hackers stole 615 million from Axie Infinity, and then you've looked at the losses in NFT crimes, right? Up 667%. Again, these are highly lucrative environments, and because we're transacting money, because we're dealing with digital assets that's worth something, the attackers are going to be there. In a nutshell, right, we are really dealing with an environment, the metaverse environment is definitely rife with opportunities for attackers to exploit. So what do we do about it? I would propose, much like what we've been proposing for enterprise security today, I would propose that we apply the principle of zero trust. But why is zero trust so important? I think that the answer to that question comes in the idea that when you look at groundbreaking innovations such as the metaverse, right, such as 3D designs, use of IoT, crypto, NFT, and then you combine that with the ever evolving attacks, right? That the hackers are kind of keeping pace and exploiting, all the different weaknesses in both the cloud, the IoT, as well as the crypto space. You can, that those two things combined is greater than any legacy security that you currently have, right? Which is to say that the old mindset of perimeter security, the old mindset of using tools that are not equipped with AI or machine learning, the legacy security essentially is not sufficient to meet the needs of the metaverse. And so therefore we need to apply a new paradigm, a new way of thinking. And we think that this new way of thinking is zero trust. We are not the only ones. The DoD, NIST, many regulators across the country, including the Bank of Philippines, the Central Bank of Philippines, they all push the idea that you've got to now think about your security from a zero trust approach, which is really making sure that you get rid of implicit trust in your architecture and that you continually validate each layer of the digital interaction. So we will get into that when we talk about the different layers of the metaverse. Now, just to kind of baseline, right, what's zero trust? Because you hear this term very often. I take the definition from the DoD, which is that the key tenets of zero trust is you have an assume breached mindset, right? So you plan your architecture with a breach in mind, and you basically make your architecture resilient to attacks by planning for it. Secondly, this never trust, always verify principle essentially is a continuous validation principles. You don't just allow and then ignore, right? Basically, after you authenticate and authorize, you let an administrator laterally move across the environment. That doesn't happen in a zero trust model. In a zero trust model, every user interaction, every API interaction, every digital interaction is basically evaluated over and over again to make sure that the behavior is still what we expect it to be. And then lastly, this whole idea of applying unified analytics. We are at the point where if we consume all these events and all this data, it's close to impossible to manually detect actionable intelligence. So we've got to rely on AI and machine learning to really flag what is anomalous in our environment. So now how do you apply that, right, to kind of the 7 layers? So now we've got that zero trust mindset, the zero trust tenets. I wanted to kind of share with you the 7 layers that John Radoff came up with for the metaverse. Again, the metaverse is a very new, I guess, a new concept in the sense that it's a new concept that's widely adopted now. And as you know, in kind of networking, you've got the OSI layers. Well, when I saw John Radoff's 7 layers, I thought that it would be really, it would make a lot of sense to kind of talk about security at all these 7 layers. So how do you apply it? Let's go and get started. So at the bottom layer, we have the infrastructure of the metaverse, right? So in the infrastructure, you are essentially talking about the network, right? You're still riding on some kind of cloud infrastructure. You're lower than cloud. You're riding on a network. You're riding on Wi-Fi. You're potentially riding on 5G. So the call there is by applying microsegmentation, for example, assume breach, applying microsegmentation into your network, by having visibility into your Wi-Fi traffic, into your 5G traffic, into your API traffic. That is key. On the life cycle, truly, the entire life cycle of cloud development has to be evaluated. Again, you continually validate, the beginning, instantiating the cloud infrastructure as code. You evaluate, the security that the code that you use, right? If it's public code, if it's private code, make sure you're scanning it for vulnerabilities continuously. You're equipping your developers to have tools to be able to validate if the code that they're writing is secure. And then when you get to runtime, you're actually looking at baselining normal behavior and flagging anomalous behavior. So the entire life cycle of the cloud has to completely be constantly monitored, right? And thirdly, implementing a next generation zero trust network architecture for all the use cases where you have remote users, branch users, and contractor users, outside developers working in your metaverse environment is absolutely key. So that's on the infrastructure layer. On the human interface layer, so now we're talking about users interacting with the metaverse, right? And so bar none, strong authentication, especially biometric MFA, is highly recommended. And the ability not only to have strong authentication, but to also have a capability to baseline normal behavior and flag abnormal user behavior. Next is, when it comes to users and the metaverse, absolutely be cognizant of your privacy policies and establish a baseline for how your IoT device is going to collect, use, and how you're going to protect that data that's coming in from your IoT device, right? Moving on to decentralization, which is really talking about the edge computing component, the microservices, as well as the blockchain components, right? So in that respect, definitely implement an AI-enabled threat detection and remediation from the cloud all the way to the edge. So what that means is that use a consolidated platform that is able to ingest all the different points of your metaverse infrastructure, and then layer up AI and machine learning to baseline normal and then flag abnormal behavior. Secondly, on the decentralization, which basically involves having APIs interact with other companies, other metaverses, secure that API architecture, have strong authentication to validate, never trust, right? Always validate, and then continually monitor that API interaction. And then lastly, from a blockchain perspective, there's a method called lock, mint, burn method to protect against cross-chain bridges. Cross-chain is when you're trying to bridge cryptocurrencies, right? Two different cryptocurrencies. So definitely apply known and tried and true methodologies to implement cross-chain securely. Next, going to spatial computing. So spatial computing is talking about the actual 3D components of your metaverse, the multitasking, the UI interfaces of the metaverse. And in those cases, continually harden and patch all your development tools and environments. So your 3D engines, your VR engines, all that have development components, right? Make sure you harden them and harden every step of that development environment. Next, cryptographically verify and baseline your IoT devices, especially when you're dealing with digital twins as they connect into your spatial network. So using cryptography, it is very important to be able to validate the integrity of all your endpoints where this is concerned. And then lastly, continuously monitor the integrity of data, be it from IoT or biometrics from the end users. Moving on to the creator economy, right? So this is where the metaverse is spread out, and other people are able to contribute to the metaverse using design tools, using workflow, and then transacting on the back of the metaverse. Again, strong authentication, granular access control is key to this effort. Zero trust, right? Make sure that you can validate the identity, and then after you've validated the identity, make sure that you're continuously testing to ensure that the behavior of this identity has not deviated. The third part is third-party code. So, in a creator economy, they're going to reuse code, etc. And so if there are a lot of code reuse, make sure that those code is consistently scanned, and if there are public repositories that your metaverse is consuming from, make sure that you scan those repositories consistently. And lastly, create a notification system for creators so that at any time that there is, either as an authentication request, a money transaction, a new account, or a change of crypto wallet, anything that is significant, make sure that you build in notification systems that go back out to the creators, as well as notify your SOC so that they know to look at it. And then lastly, this whole idea of the experience of the metaverse and the discovery, which is sort of the ad networks and the social curations, ratings, etc. We're really talking about an awareness, right, for users. So continually educate all users, all participants of the metaverse in cybersecurity, making sure that anti-fraud is created to detect fraudulent transactions, or even robotic or automated social curations, reviews, etc. Applying the principle of never trusting and always validating, is key, so that you don't assume that a review is just written by a human, right? So you're continuously testing and validating that. And then lastly, as I've said before, designing self-alerting mechanisms allows end users to be aware when there are security incidents that are happening within their space. Now, just to sum it all up, right? When you look at the metaverse, you definitely have to apply these zero trust capabilities, get visibility. However you're implementing the metaverse, whatever state you're in terms of instantiation, from development environment, to your production environment, to how you interface with your third party, or if you're subscribing to a metaverse platform, ask them about the visibility of end users, the visibility of API interactions, so that you can deeply inspect those communications. Secondly, context. Context is the idea that as you consume all these various data points, right, you need to be able to correlate that. And that's why we lean on AI and machine learning to do that. So, at the network layer, you're consuming, traffic from the network, you're consuming traffic from endpoints, you're consuming traffic from cloud. Make sure you're able to correlate that by applying AI and machine learning on top of that. So you get a higher fidelity for your alerts. And then lastly, thirdly, control, right? The zero trust capability of control is the idea that you're able to consistently apply zero trust policy across your environment. So, if the metaverse has on-prem components as well as cloud components as well as edge components, make sure that you have a consistent platform that's able to apply standards and policies across all those environments. And then lastly, response. Definitely build, again, those self-alerting capabilities, tie it into your SOC so that they can automate and orchestrate responses as they see security events happening within your metaverse. I would kind of end by saying that, zero trust, like the metaverse, is a journey. So you've got to focus on building that culture from day one. You've got to build the culture of assume breach. So you're planning for cyber resilience, in your metaverse implementations. Secondly, you've got to always develop continuous validation, that you're baselining all your digital interactions, whether it's users to machine, machine to machine, physical to digital, and vice versa. And then lastly, you've got to be able to quickly respond to any security incident within your environment, right? So develop orchestration and automation capabilities so that we can push a lot of the mundane activities away and help your security analysts and your SOC folks focus on higher higher level threats, because that's where our attackers are operating in. They're really operating at a very evolved level, and so we need to rapidly respond to that. I hope that this talk was useful to you. For any further questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me.